There was a red napkin folded perfectly into the shape of a heart, sitting in the middle of our kitchen table. It hadn't been there the night before. Next to it, a glass of water, half drunk, lipstick on the rim, a note underneath, written on hotel stationery, folded once but not sealed. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because the thing is, she hadn't come home. Not really. She walked in just before sunrise, barefoot, carrying her heels like they weighed 100 pounds. Her dress, the green one she said made her look expensive, was wrinkled like it had been used as a blanket. Or something worse. She didn't say a word. She walked past me, past the dog, past the table with the napkin, and disappeared into the shower. I heard the water run for nearly an hour. I didn't move. Instead, I stared at that napkin. Who folds a napkin into a heart at 3 in the morning? A bartender? A stranger with charm and too much free time? Or her? Did she do it, mocking me? Marking territory? Saying goodbye without saying it? My hands shook when I picked up the note. It wasn't long. It wasn't even addressed to me. Thank you for last night. You made me feel like I still exist. That was all it said. No name. No number. No explanation. But that sentence hit me harder than any confession ever could. Because you don't write something like that unless you meant it to be found. And in that moment, standing barefoot in my kitchen at 6:14 a.m., I realized she didn't come home last night. She came back from someone else's. The steam was still spilling out of the bathroom when I heard the click of the mirror cabinet opening. Then another, something being slid across the sink counter. Then the unmistakable clink of glass. And silence. I didn't say anything when she came out, wrapped in a towel, her eyes puffy like she'd been crying under the water. Her hair dripped down her back, and she didn't look at me. Just walked straight to the bedroom like she was avoiding an invisible wire she didn't want to trip. I waited, maybe 30 seconds. Then I walked into the bathroom, not even sure why, and that's when I saw it. Her toothbrush was gone. Not misplaced. Not in the wrong cup. Gone. She had taken it with her, to the bar? To someone's place? Or worse, replaced it with his. There was now only mine, standing lonely in that stupid little ceramic holder we got in a Christmas swap. That's when something in me cracked. You see, it's the little things. Everyone thinks it's the kiss, the night out, the hotel room. But it's never that. It's never the headline. It's the things no one sees. The toothbrush vanishing. The shampoo changed. Her favorite mug now untouched. Her charger no longer on the nightstand. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing for departure. Piece by piece, like a coward boxing up her life in silence, pretending nothing's wrong. I didn't ask about the napkin, or the note, or the missing toothbrush. Instead, I followed her into the bedroom, where she was already scrolling on her phone, her wet hair staining the pillowcase. I said her name. She looked up, a flicker of guilt in her eyes that she couldn't swallow fast enough. I asked, "Where were you last night?" She didn't lie. Not really. She said she ended up at Jules' place, one of her co-workers, after losing track of time at the bar. She said it too casually, as if the sentence had been practiced in her throat all night long. She didn't know I'd found the note, or seen the napkin, or noticed the toothbrush. I told her I didn't believe her. I expected her to deny harder, defend, cry. Instead, she just blinked slowly and said, "Okay." Not, "You're wrong." Not, "Let me explain." Just okay. Like the conversation was over. And that's when I realized it already was. She had already said goodbye. To me. To this house. Maybe even to herself. She just hadn't told me out loud yet. That afternoon, while she was out getting coffee, I did something I'm not proud of. I opened her laptop. No password. Maybe she wanted me to look. Maybe she was testing how far I'd go. All I know is, the first thing I saw was her calendar. There was an event saved from the night before. Color-coded red. Titled simply, Closure. I stared at that word on the calendar for a long time. Closure. One word. Red event tag. No location. No notes. Just a timestamp that ended exactly 1 hour before she came home barefoot, silent, and soaked in someone else's night. I sat there in front of her laptop for maybe 20 minutes, listening for the garage door to rumble or her tires crunching into the driveway, but it stayed quiet. I scrolled back through the calendar. The further I went, the colder I got. I started to see a pattern, small things, meetings that didn't exist, yoga class, blocks that overlapped with restaurants I didn't know she liked, phone reminders with nothing written in the description. But every one of them was marked red. Every one of them was hidden beneath something ordinary. And it made me wonder, how long had she been building this secret life in plain sight? How many nights had I kissed her goodbye while she walked directly into someone else's arms? By the time she came home, I wasn't angry. I was quiet. I was beyond anger. I had crossed into that strange, awful territory where your own memories start turning against you. You remember moments you thought were pure, and suddenly they feel staged, manufactured, like she had already decided to leave you but kept you warm just long enough so it wouldn't be inconvenient. She walked in with 2 coffees. One for her, one for me. I didn't touch mine. She noticed. "Everything okay?" she asked. I said nothing. I just reached into my back pocket and pulled out the hotel note, the one that said, "Thank you for last night. You made me feel like I still exist." I laid it on the counter between us, gently, like a scalpel in surgery. She looked down at it, stared for a beat too long, and then gave the smallest nod I've ever seen. She didn't ask how I found it. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry. Instead, she leaned against the fridge, crossed her arms, and whispered, "I knew you'd find it eventually." It was the most devastating sentence I've ever heard in my life. Not because it confirmed anything, but because it showed she'd already moved past it. I was still at the starting line of pain, and she was already on lap 3, mourning something that hadn't even died in my mind yet. I asked her who he was. She said, "It doesn't matter." I said, "It does to me." She said nothing. We didn't speak again that day. That night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep while she typed something on her phone under the blanket. Her thumbs moved fast. Too fast. I didn't ask. I just watched the wall, heart pounding, waiting for her to turn the light off. Sometime after midnight, I heard the front door. Not closing. Not locking. Opening. Then nothing. I got out of bed 20 minutes later. Quietly. Kip followed me. I walked down the hall and saw it. The front door, pulled just barely closed, not latched. No wind. No accident. It was left that way. Deliberately. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at that 2-inch gap between the door and the frame. And I swear, I felt someone watching me from the other side of it. Not physically, but spiritually. Like the man who was supposed to walk through that door had chosen not to. Like she had expected him and he hadn't come. Or maybe he had. Maybe he saw the lights still on and got spooked. Or maybe he had come the night before. And this was just habit now. Repetition. I closed the door. Locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. All of it. Then I walked back to bed and lay there next to her, wide awake, her back to me, her body already elsewhere. The following morning, she acted like nothing happened. Like the door hadn't been left open. Like the note hadn't been found. Like the word closure hadn't been burned into my brain. She asked if I wanted eggs. Played with Kip. Hummed an old 90s song while rinsing dishes. I don't think I even blinked during that breakfast. My body sat at the table. My mind was spinning somewhere above the ceiling fan, watching this absurd theater unfold. I couldn't pretend anymore, but I wasn't ready to explode either. So I tried something else. I asked her what her day looked like. She smiled and said, "Probably just emails, then I might swing by Jules again after work. Her cat's sick." That name again. Jules. And it hit me. I had never actually met this woman. My wife had worked with her for over a year, and yet I'd never seen her face, never heard her voice, not even once. No pictures, no tags, no mentions on socials. Just Jules this, Jules that, the most convenient ghost in her arsenal of lies. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded. Let her leave. She kissed my cheek like everything was still intact, and I let her believe it was. A few hours later, I started digging. Not through her texts. Not yet, but through my own memory. I opened her work events folder on the shared drive. Nothing. Searched her email for any trace of Jules. Nothing. Not even a thanks for lunch or a forwarded calendar invite. That's not how women operate. They don't go months without digital footprints, especially not best friends with sick cats. Jules didn't exist. At 3:17 p.m., my phone rang. Blocked number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something in me, some cracked instinct, told me to answer. I said hello. There was silence. Then a man's voice, quiet, steady, almost rehearsed. "You don't know me, but you should know what she's doing isn't new." I froze. My throat closed like I'd swallowed smoke. "Who is this?" I asked. "She's done this before," he said. "Not like this exactly, but close enough. You're not crazy." I stood up from my desk. My legs felt like plastic. Who are you? He hung up. I called back. Blocked. Gone. The room tilted for a second. Not literally, but emotionally. Like gravity shifted, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to feel real again. She's done this before. Those words hit harder than any affair. Because betrayal once is horrifying. Betrayal again, systematically, coldly, that's something else entirely. That's pathology. And the worst part? Somewhere inside me, I already knew. That night, I didn't wait for her to come home. I drove to the bar she said she always went to with her coworkers. I parked across the street. Waited. Around 8:40, she walked in. Alone. Hair down. Lipstick fresh. A little black purse I'd never seen before. I watched her sit at the counter like she'd done it 1,000 times. 15 minutes later, a man sat beside her. They didn't kiss. They didn't even touch. But their body language was off. Familiar, but guarded. He said something. She laughed, too quickly, too brightly. And then she leaned in. I snapped a photo. Shaky hands. Blurred, but enough to make out his face. I didn't recognize him. But I would soon. Because what I didn't know then, what I'd find out just 2 nights later, is that he wasn't just some stranger at the bar. He was the man who called me. It wasn't where I expected to find it. Not in her purse. Not under the car seat. Not even in her nightstand, where I'd already searched twice with the precision of a forensic technician too afraid to leave fingerprints. The second phone, the one I wasn't even sure existed, was taped to the underside of the kitchen sink drawer, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, as if she had prepared it for war. I only found it because Kip dropped his toy ball. It rolled under the cabinet, and when I reached down to grab it, my fingers brushed the smooth edge of something foreign. My stomach dropped before my eyes even confirmed what it was. I already knew. I slid it out like I was defusing a bomb. Small, black, scratched on the edges, no case. I held it in my palm and just stared. It didn't vibrate. It didn't ring. It didn't do anything. And that silence? It was louder than a scream. It was locked, of course, passcode protected. But the battery was still alive, sitting at 26%. Just enough to taunt me. I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't confront her yet, not without knowing what was inside. I could guess. Messages. Numbers not saved under names. Maybe even pictures. But I needed proof before I made a move. So I did something I've never done in my life. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in 6 years, my brother-in-law. His name is Callum. IT guy. Not close to me, but closer to the idea of revenge than I was capable of on my own. I didn't tell him everything. Just said I found a phone, needed help, and asked if he still remembered how to brute force a lock screen. His answer? Come by tonight. Bring beer. I hid the phone in a Ziploc of rice. Not because it was wet, but because I'd read somewhere that it could mask signal attempts to remotely wipe it. Probably nonsense. But at that point, I was trying to outsmart a ghost. When I got to Callum's, he was already pulling out his old jailbreaking kit, muttering something about how Androids are easier than iPhones. He didn't ask who the phone belonged to. I think he knew. Or maybe he didn't care. He just liked the challenge. 40 minutes in, the lock screen cracked open like a rib cage. The home screen was bare. Only a few apps. Messaging, notes, gallery, and an encrypted call app one didn't recognize, nor a link. But that wasn't the worst part. The wallpaper wasn't a stock photo. It was a picture of me, sleeping. Callum and I froze at the same time. He looked at me like I had just pulled a horror movie out of my pocket. I had no memory of that photo being taken. My hair was messy. My face was half pressed into a pillow. Kip was curled beside me. Someone had taken that photo in our bedroom while I slept. Not her. She'd been out that night. I remember, because that was the same night I had started tracking her calendar. The night she had come home late and told me she'd fallen asleep on Jules' couch. That lie again. I opened the gallery. Only 9 photos. All of them either of me, our house, or the back of her head, always at odd angles. None of them recent. None of them time-stamped. It felt like surveillance. But then I checked the Notes app. There was one file. It was just a list. Short. Simple. Terrifying. Closure, complete. Avoid Jules' mention going forward. Spare key, still behind outlet plate. 313 photo too risky, delete. He doesn't know? He'll never know. I couldn't read anymore. My brain just shut down. I handed the phone to Callum and walked out into the night air, where I nearly threw up into the hedge. It wasn't hers. That was the worst part. The second phone wasn't hers. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had been in our house. Someone who had watched me sleep. Someone who knew where we hid the spare key. Someone who had been tracking her, or tracking us, with terrifying precision. And that's when everything shifted again. Because this wasn't just a story of infidelity anymore. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a trap, and I was already inside it. I didn't come home right away. After we cracked the second phone, after I read that note about the spare key, and saw my own sleeping face staring back at me from someone else's lock screen, I couldn't walk back through our front door like everything was okay. I drove in circles for hours, sometimes without realizing where I was headed. I stopped at a gas station I hadn't been to in years just to wash my face in the sink and stare at my reflection like it belonged to someone else. There was no rage, no heartbreak, not even grief anymore. Just nausea, a quiet, throbbing sickness that comes when your reality starts to come apart at the edges. When I finally got back, it was just after 2 a.m. The lights were off. Kip barked once and then immediately went quiet, which never happened. He's always alert when I come home late. Always. But this time he whimpered and retreated to the guest room like he'd already decided it wasn't safe in the main hallway. She was awake. I knew it before I even turned the corner into the kitchen. She was sitting at the table. Same spot where I'd found the folded napkin. Only this time, she wasn't alone. The man from the bar, the one I'd seen her laugh with, leaned toward. He was sitting across from her. Calm, clean-shaven, wearing a sweatshirt that said State College Alumni, like the most generic disguise possible. He looked at me with an expression I still can't name. Not guilt, not pride, not even shame. Just confirmation. Like I'd arrived exactly when he knew I would. She stood up immediately. It's not what it looks like, she said. Classic. I walked slowly, almost mechanically, over to the table and placed the second phone between them. Her face dropped. His didn't change at all. He leaned back slightly, crossed his arms, and gave a tiny nod. So you found it, he said, like he was congratulating me. She didn't speak. Not at first. So I did. You lied about Jules. About the hotel. About everything. But this? I said, tapping the phone, this isn't a lie. This is insane. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I could see her searching for which version of the truth to give me. But she knew it was too late for half measures. His name is Nolan, she finally said, voice small. We met last year. I stared at him. You've been in my house. Nolan nodded. 3 times. He said it like he was telling me how many times he's been to a bowling alley. Casually. Measured. Unbothered. I turned back to her. You let him in? Her mouth trembled. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She paused. Her eyes welled up, but I couldn't tell if it was regret or exposure that made her break. Then she whispered something I'll never forget for as long as I live. You weren't supposed to find out. None of this was meant for you. And with that one sentence, everything clicked in a way I didn't want it to. This wasn't just about an affair. This was something bigger. Coordinated. Planned. I asked her flat out. Are you being blackmailed? She didn't answer. But Nolan stood up slowly, stretched his back, and said, I think I'll let you two talk now. Then he walked out of our house like it was his own, leaving the door slightly open behind him. I locked it. Deadbolt. Chain. Everything. Then I turned to her, and she was already crying. I didn't comfort her. I just sat across from her and asked again, Are you being forced to do this? She shook her head. Then she said, No one's forcing me. But I didn't start this either. It's more complicated than you think. Then she looked at me with absolute sincerity and said, He wasn't supposed to fall in love with me. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was delusional. I trusted you, I said. I built a life with you. She wiped her face and whispered, I know. That's why I'm trying to protect you now. That scared me more than anything else. Because what do you need to be protected from when your wife is already sitting across the table from you, confessing to a year-long entanglement with a man who installs hidden phones and takes photos of you in your sleep? I waited until just after noon the next day. I told her I needed space, told her I was going to stay with my cousin for a few nights, a cousin who doesn't exist. She didn't argue. She just nodded, whispered something that sounded like, I understand, and walked back into the bedroom like a ghost wearing her own skin. I didn't pack anything. Just keys, my phone, and the printout of Nolan's license plate that Callum pulled from the grainy security cam footage we hacked from the corner deli near the bar. It wasn't difficult to find his car. Turns out people like Nolan don't hide. They move like they're invincible. He parked in a public lot near the edge of the business district, on a corner too quiet to notice, too ordinary to be suspicious. I waited across the street in a borrowed sedan, watching. 3 hours passed before he finally came back. He wasn't alone. He was laughing. With someone I didn't recognize. A woman, mid-30s, wearing athletic gear, carrying a smoothie in one hand and a set of keys in the other. Not my wife. He kissed her. Twice. She climbed into the passenger seat of his car, and they drove off like it was a Sunday morning date. I followed, but not for long. Just far enough to see where they lived. A townhouse. Clean, beige, boring. No bars on the windows. No cameras. Just an American flag on the porch and a wind chime shaped like a lighthouse. The kind of place that screams normal, but I had stopped believing in normal days ago. After they disappeared inside, I returned to his car. It was parked half a block away. I didn't hesitate. I crouched beside the passenger rear wheel and ran my fingers around the inner lip of the well. It took less than 20 seconds to find it, taped to the frame in a Ziploc, dirt-dusted, sealed tight. An envelope. Inside it, a stack of photos. Not of her. Of me. Me at the grocery store. Me picking up Kip's prescription. Me standing in the garage. Me sitting alone at a diner, hunched over a notebook. Me watching television from the living room window, the grain of the glass warping my face. All taken from a distance. Some at night. Some during the day. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the last one. It was dated 4 months ago. It showed me asleep in bed. And her, my wife, standing over me, looking straight into the camera. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was expressionless. I dropped the envelope, stumbled back to my car, locked the doors, and sat in absolute silence while my heart tried to claw its way out of my ribs. This wasn't surveillance. This wasn't an affair. This was documentation. Cold, calculated, methodical documentation of my existence. But for what? Why? I didn't go home. I didn't go to Callum's. I drove to the lake, parked where the signal was weak, and scrolled through her texts from earlier that morning. Her last message to me had said, "Please be safe." That was all. No apology. No denial. No anger. Just those 3 words. Please be safe. Not "I love you," or "I'm sorry." Because somewhere, on some level, she knew I was getting close. And she knew Nolan wasn't some fling. Nolan was something else. Something darker. Something she had let into our lives. I stayed at the lake until dusk. Then I did what I never thought I'd do. I called him. His number was buried in the metadata of the second phone. A contact named simply E. I didn't know what the E stood for. But when he picked up, he didn't say hello. He didn't ask who it was. He just said, "You shouldn't have found the envelope." Then he hung up. And I swear to God, 5 seconds later, my car alarm started blaring. Even though I was the only one within 100 feet of it. I didn't sleep that night. After the call with Nolan, after the envelope full of surveillance, after the car alarm echoed into the trees like some warning shot from a god I didn't believe in anymore, I just sat there in my car until the sky turned gray. My body was wired, fried, and hollow all at once. I couldn't tell if I was having a breakdown or just waking up from a life I didn't realize had been a dream. But something changed as the sun came up. Not clarity, not peace, but resolve. I drove back to the house. Not our house, not anymore. I already knew it. So did she. But I needed to see her one last time. Not to scream, not to beg, but to end it like a man. Calm, awake, finally in control. She was waiting for me when I got there. She'd packed a bag, one of the small ones. She'd folded her coat neatly over the handle and placed Kip's leash on the counter. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was just ready. I looked around and realized most of her things were already gone. Books, jewelry, hair ties from the drawer. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Surgical. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want lies. She handed me a letter, handwritten, sealed. I haven't read it. I might never. That was her story, not mine. Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She kneeled, looked Kip in the eyes, and whispered, "He's yours now. Be good." And for the first time in all this madness, Kip didn't follow her to the door. She left without saying goodbye. I didn't chase her. I didn't watch from the window. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, surrounded by the faint echo of a life that had already ended. And then, for the first time in weeks, I breathed. It took weeks to fully unpack the damage. I went to therapy, told Callum everything, changed the locks, sold the couch, Burn the hotel napkin. I adopted another dog, for Kip, not for me. A clumsy beagle named Moss who immediately became his shadow. But the biggest change came 3 months later. I moved. Not far, just to the next town over. A little house with an orange door and a broken fence I still haven't fixed. I planted tomatoes. Started jogging. I even picked up an old hobby I'd abandoned years ago, watercolor. Not for sale, not for show, just for me. And every now and then, when the air is too quiet and the sun dips behind the trees just right, I think about that night she stayed at the bar. About the choices we make and the people we trust, and how sometimes the person you love most in the world turns out to be the chapter you have to close in order to begin your story. But I don't feel bitterness anymore. Just distance. And maybe, weirdly, a kind of gratitude. Because that night she stayed at the bar, that night she lost me, was the same night I found myself.